SMA. And SMA is one thing that's utilized in the Bollinger Bands, which we'll get to next as well. But SMA is a simple moving average. So what that means is it's an average. So that means, what is an average of? It's an average of closing prices. So on a stock, since we open and close every single day, you'll take the close price of the stock that day and you'll average it. So you have the red line. I believe that's a 50-day moving average, because that's what I like to use for more of a shorter term swing. So it's the average of that closing stock price for the last 50 days. A more long-term one is the purple line, and that's a 200-day moving average. I use that for my long trades, and that's the average of the closing price for the last 200 days. So hopefully that makes sense. It's pretty easy to understand there. And then simple moving averages, I try to build the slideshow in a way that it would add on to each next slide. So like you'll see moving averages here. You have the 50 and the 200 day. They actually come together down here, and they'll do a sort of a crossover here. So that's almost getting into the MACD, the convergence and divergence, another completely different indicator. But you'll see that everything has a little bit to do with the next thing. And it really is dependent on what indicators work best for you, and then putting them together. I would not recommend using a ton of indicators. I use, the support and resistance, but that's never really on the screen. I do that in my head. And then I'll have some moving averages on there, Bollinger Bands, and volume. And that's really it. Occasionally MACD, but lately I haven't been using that. So it's just finding what works best for you, right? Let's see if I have anything out here. So like I said, it's average price for the last however many days the stock closed. And like I said, 50 and 200, those are two that I use personally. Those work really well for me. And then the average price for the last X days the crypto closed. Oh, and we talked about crypto not closing. It's 24/7, 365. But technically, you can see if you're watching it, I think it's Greenwich Mean Time. Correct me if I'm wrong. When a new day opens, like a new day candle opens for crypto, you can see, if you're on the East Coast, it's like 5 hours before midnight, but a new day candle will open up at that GMT time, right? So when GMT time at midnight, that day candle will close, and that'll be the closing price, since crypto never closes. That may or may not be obvious, but I don't know. Want to say everything just in case somebody has a question. Let's see here. Yes, it's not too much to say about SMA. They just really help analyze your price trends, right? And kind of like we had trend lines in the previous one, right? Let's go back. We have a trend line here, trend line support, and you can see the buy zones in the blue and the red over there, bouncing off of it. People use SMAs for similar stuff. They really do. So you can see when people are talking about a stock, since I'm looking at a stock right here, we're looking at Netflix, of course, NFLX, Netflix, and this is on that stock site I was telling you about, JJ. But, excuse me. So you can see that it's more or less coming off that 50-day moving average, which is pretty cool, right? And it's well above the 200-day. So you would assume that if it got close to that 200-day moving average or dropped below it, there's probably a long-term change about to happen. And what I mean by that is if you go down to the bottom left of the screen and you see where we have this crossover between the 50-day and the 200-day, you see the stock price coming down, and you see the 50-day crossing over to the 200-day. But more importantly, on the 200-day, you see the stock price. You see all those candles are bouncing off. I wish this mouse worked perfect. But you see all these candles bouncing off the 200-day moving average right here, right? And then it breaks through. And then a few days, because this is a daily chart, right here, 1 day. So each candle represents 1 day, remember? So you see it breaks through the 200-day, and then a few days later, there's a crossover. So that would technically be two indicators now that the price is moving bullishly. So I think that's pretty cool, right? So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. I'd say about 7 trading days that, you know, this broke out. And like I said, there's a breakout, and then there's this huge pullback buying opportunity right here that comes all the way back down to the 50-day moving average. So you have a breakout over the 50, or I'm sorry, over the 200, comes back down to the 50, and then there's this huge gap up. I mean, so you would just made a killing there. That's like roughly 20% jump up right there. Then there's a breakout, and of course another pullback to give another buying opportunity. So that's the great thing about patience and trading. There's usually a pullback if you have the patience. It's incredibly hard motion to pull back, right? So there's this gap up here. This is a stock, right? So there are such things as gap ups. There's no gap ups in the crypto world. A gap up, since stocks open and close every single day, right? So there's actually so many things to talk about, but there's pre-market movements in stock world, and there's aftermarket movements in the stock world. So certain people with certain privileges, and I don't know what those are right now off the top of my head, are able to trade pre-market and after the market's closed. For the American stock markets at least, there's always a lot less volume, so it's a dangerous realm to trade in, but you will get these gap ups as you see right here. So this was like the closing price clearly for this day in October, and what is this, 2016, October of last year? I don't remember what news this was, but it gapped up. So there's probably some big news, or October, end of third quarter, maybe a great earnings report, maybe. And the stock price just skyrocketed overnight because the news came out probably after closing that day in October that they had a good earnings report, right? Because you have an earnings report every quarter on these stocks, and it just traded real high the next day.